Next, we have a presentation from Rod Butters, who is CTO at Aible. And he's going to be talking about eliminating risk from AI for digital transformation. So Rod is kind of the CTO of Aible, has over 20 years experience bringing enterprise apps, infrastructure, and cloud solutions to market. And over to you.
Thank you. Hey, thank you very much. So topic of the talk, how do we actually make sure that AI eliminates risk rather than introduces risk to our digital transformation processes? Aible, a little bit about Aible. We were founded by the team that developed BeyondCore. BeyondCore was acquired by Salesforce and became Salesforce Einstein Discovery. Between the two founders, Arijit Sengupta and Jonathan Ray, they've built over 2,000 AI models and have seen firsthand some of the issues that come up in the development of AI and some of the risks that end up showing up in the deployments. And out of that grew some of the things that we've done at Aible in terms of how we can actually make AI development much more agile and eliminate risk that it introduces into the product. We were recently ranked #1 by Gartner in AutoML in their CADES Magic Quadrant analysis. And we've also been noted by Forrester as being a solution that really focuses on how do we bring value to the business out of AI rather than how do we create really incredible models. And I should probably grab a clicker here and see if this works. Great. So a lot of us are here obviously because we have a belief that AI is going to help our organization, and we're not in the minority. Many businesses today are thinking about how they would incorporate AI into their businesses, how they would leverage that in their various processes. But there's a real challenge. Here's the downside. When we look at the results, a lot of AIs don't actually make it all the way into deployment. Deployment meaning that the business, the organization, the individuals are actually leveraging the AI in getting their jobs done. And another study showed that only 10% of organizations can actually see measurable value or measurable improvements from the AI. And I would say that the fundamental issue around this, and one of the things that's grown out of what we've done in exploring how we can build and deploy models, is this myth that somehow we're going to come up with some magic cool model that either has phenomenal accuracy or maybe great recall or great log loss metrics. But basically, at the end of the day, we're building a single AI model that somehow is going to perfectly reflect what's going on with the business, what it needs, as well as what's happening in the market moving forward. Now, if you think about this, we're setting up our data scientists, or if you are a data scientist, you're setting yourself up for an impossible task. You're setting yourself up to basically be a mind reader and a fortune teller. A mind reader because somehow I know what the business actually truly needs. And if we think about digital transformation, I mean, the whole point of digital transformation is the recognition that we don't know exactly what the business needs, that we're going to continually evolve and improve on that. But yet, I'm building this one true model around this set of metrics. I'm going to somehow deploy this, and somehow I've got to magically know whether I need to choose for accuracy, or I need to choose for recall, or I'm going to use a log loss function. What is it I'm going to measure this model against to understand that it's going to meet the needs of the business? So I'm setting ourselves up for something that's not going to work. Also, when I get done with this thing, what's going on in the market? If conditions have changed, how do I factor that into the creation of my model? So it's really a losing proposition to think that I'm going to come up with this big model. It's also anathema to what we're trying to do in digital transformation. And that is, when we're trying to do digital transformation, we want agile. Well, let's look at this picture. And this is kind of a traditional AI development process. And it doesn't look all that agile at all. As a matter of fact, it looks rather waterfall. And why is that? Because we assume a lot of cost up front. And as soon as we assume costs, we're assuming risk. And we don't know what the benefits are going to be until very far down the road. And it's only at the end when we actually find out what the benefits are that we retire risk and actually see if we got any impact out of the model. This is waterfall, okay? A long time ago, we said we got to stop building software this way. And yet, here we are right now today, building our AI models in this waterfall approach. So, what does that then do to digital transformation? Well, here's some of the key things. I mean, in digital transformation, we want to build agility into our business. Are we going to take a product and suddenly start wrapping a service around it? Are we going to start addressing a different market with something we have? I mean, these are the things we want to empower with digital transformation. We want to be more responsive to what's changing in the market, not less. We want to shorten those timelines. Also, we want to empower all of the users in our business. I mean, the cool thing about AI is I could, in theory, get recommendations right down to the individual level and empower individuals to take action rather than having them to go through very structured processes. That's an idea fundamental to digital transformation. Continuous improvement, again, being agile as an organization and recognizing when we do need to change. And this is a subtle point, I'll come back to this and spend some time on it, but how do I make sure that my tactics and strategy are actually in alignment? Because my AI could actually be doing things in my organization that aren't aligned with what I'm trying to achieve from an overall market strategy. And lastly, how do I connect everybody in my organization to all work together? And if I would kind of encapsulate what it is we're trying to achieve at Aible, and it's particularly in regard to this last thing, is that if you were to say, what's our vision statement, it's really that we don't want AI that's done to us, we want AI that works for us. And the only way we're going to really ultimately get to that is to have a way that we're building AIs, not in some kind of waterfall model, but built by a few, but how do we make AI something that everyone in the organization can actively contribute to and help us build? So we do think there's a new way to approach this. And that is that what we'd like to do is instead of building that true, single, perfect AI, we actually want to build a portfolio of AIs. And so the idea here is that instead of just building it for accuracy or building it for log loss, we're actually going to build a whole collection of AI models that sweep a range of business conditions, okay? And I can do this with custom loss functions. Now, if I'm doing this and I want to do this rapidly at scale so that I can create some agility, one of the things that we leverage actually is a serverless first architecture, where we actually, and I'll explain a little more about serverless if it's not familiar to people here, but it's the idea that I'm actually getting a function or a request or compute as a service rather than trying to bake in a large compute cluster to go off and build the one true AI. Once I get there, then I say this creates a platform then that allows us for the flexibility and empowerment. And later on, time permitting, I'll talk a little bit about how a serverless first model or building things along these lines actually supports a new level of privacy and data security that meets both our objectives of being a data-driven organization as well as objectives for maintaining confidentiality and protection of information. So, just in case you don't know, serverless first, it's really on this continuum of going from bare metal to virtual machines onto containers and serverless. Here's the big difference between containers, which many of you may run Kubernetes or something like this for your clusters, and serverless. With containers and Kubernetes and those clusters, I have a cluster and I try to scale it out based on resources that I have at my disposal. And it takes time to do that. It takes time to set those things up. And even the best scale out or scale down takes time and takes a lot of tuning and attention paid to it. Instead, serverless says, hey, I'm going to turn all that responsibility over to my cloud infrastructure as a service provider, and they're going to run a mega cluster. And the cool thing about the mega cluster is that it's just really so big that I get to abuse it. This is what I love about this technology. I get to abuse it. And here's how I get to abuse it. I get to walk in and say, I'd like 1,000 of those right now, please. And in 200 milliseconds, I've got a cluster of 1,000 compute. And they go off and do it. Now, there's some tricky things, and I won't get into the details. It's not the point of this talk. some tricky things in how you use this, but you do have to do things a little bit different to run in serverless from clusters, but I do believe that this will be the direction that all of us will be going soon, because it's a lot easier when you've got a mega cluster at your disposal instead of trying to manage all these resources. And this what opens up the possibility for a different look at how I'd actually do AI. So instead of doing the one true AI around a particular metric that I've chosen, I basically am going to sweep across a range of business conditions by creating a custom loss function. And it gives me a way of getting a bunch of AIs that will respond in different ways to different business conditions. Now, here's what's cool, is that not only can I do this training, but when I go to the deployment of the models in serverless, I can effectively deploy them all. I can effectively deploy them all because in serverless, I don't pay unless it's doing useful work. So unless I want that model at a particular point in time, I don't have to pay for it. So I go ahead and deploy all these things. And underneath the covers, one of the things that we've done to make this work, and it's something I think everyone will ultimately do, is that we do dynamic routing based on business conditions, based on business metrics, based on user preference, based on things like what segment of the market or what kind of fairness I want to apply. At that point in time, I choose the exact model that I'm going to use. I choose thresholding conditions or anything else I need to apply, and that's how I get this model. And so effectively, I've got a way to deploy not a model, but a whole suite or portfolio of models that basically are available at any time. So just a couple of things then on the cost of this. What's interesting is that we've found that when we train models serverless, we're basically getting almost 70% more bang for the buck. And here's the thing. When we're running serverless, we only pay when it's doing useful work. We don't pay for infrastructure that keeps the lights on. We only pay for useful work. Our infrastructure as a service provider has basically created all the other infrastructure and things that are running in the background, and they're amortizing it over all of that service. So basically, I get a much better spend. Here's the other cool thing about this. I can go right to the best resources to do this. So I can immediately get the best bang for the buck off of my service environment. Likewise, I get some amazing efficiencies when I get to deployment. As I mentioned earlier, you only pay for what you use. So I can deploy all these models. Now, if I was trying to do this and run my own servers for doing this deployment, I'd have to size this or build scale out or scale up, scale down rules that would keep my resources optimized. And in serverless, I don't have to worry about that at all. Basically, I get the resources I need when it actually comes to play. So overall, what has this done for me? Well, this is what we see, and in particular, as we use with our customers and see how they're progressing. We've moved them off of this track of building the one true model and instead moved them to something that looks much more agile, because I'm not assuming a lot of costs up front until I understand what the benefits of the model are or how it feeds into my business. I'm not assuming a lot of risk until I start doing things like integration or trying to get it out to the users, or costs at that point. But already I have a sense of where this is going. So I've got a way to understand how this is going to impact the business. So let's assume we're all going to move to serverless. We're going to move to a portfolio of AIs. What does this do then for digital transformation? So I'm going to run through each of these and talk a little bit about how we've taken this and applied it. And again, I think this is something that we can apply across the industry as we think about how we move to a more agile approach to actually doing AI. So first off is, how do we become a proactive organization? What happens as we're working in different business models, different business environments, is that a key thing to understand about what is the right way to behave as an organization is, what is our cost model? What is our risk-reward or cost-benefit trade-off? Also, what are our overall resources that we need? And finally, what is our business strategy that we're trying to execute on? What we've done is that we've incorporated into our overall AI AutoML platform is a way for business users to come in and apply this information and see how the business would actually respond and automatically select what AI model meets those criteria. So down in the lower left is an example of where we actually capture these metrics. In this case, I'm just showing you a couple of things so you can see it on the screen, but I'm saying, hey, this is my cost to actually pursue a deal, to say, hey, sales guy, go spend time and energy on this, okay? And here's what my model, here's what my margin is on that, and also how many of these I plan to do. Obviously, if I've got 3 sales guys versus 1,000 sales guys, I want my model to create a different type of thing, to either be more aggressive, find more leads, find more opportunities, or find less, or find the best kinds of opportunities, or really narrow things in. Also in this context, I want to know what my overall goal is, because I may have a strategy that says I want to increase market share, or I have a strategy that says maybe I want to maximize bottom line profit, or I have a fixed amount of resources and I don't want to change that. I want to be able to plug in that strategy, because that's going to impact as well what it is that I want to do from the model standpoint. And lastly, then, the tool provides a way to actually incorporate this into what's my net gain of the AI. And again, one of the key things is that AIs, when you build the one magic true model, when you put it in the business, it may not actually create value at the end of the day. And so this is a way for the business to see right up front and evaluate, basically do a major what if in terms of doing this. Now, this is our tool, this is what you can do, but I would say anyone can and should actually do this and think about how they actually have a portfolio of models and how they can evaluate them against different business conditions, rather than trying to build the perfect model up front and then assume it's going to solve a business problem. Being resilient to change, this also comes up when we think about how we would actually leverage a portfolio of AIs. And again, one of the things might happen is, well, hey, we're getting close to the end of the quarter. Guess what? We're not seeing the sales revenue that we needed. We need to move to a more aggressive model, something that's generating more leads, more opportunities, and driving the sales organization in a different way. Maybe driving them off of maximizing profit and more about just generating overall top line. I need that ability that I don't have to go back to the beginning of the AI process and basically say, hey guys, got to create a new model. This one better be based on recall, not on accuracy. No, in this environment, basically, I'm going to change the metrics. My routing rules are going to change dynamically. I'm going to get a different AI in real time and be able to respond. Again, I'm in a much better place in terms of being a digitally transformed business to respond to these kinds of changes. I want to empower all the individuals. One of the things that's key is how do we get this in different places? And this does start involving some IT, but I think there's ways that we can really make this simple. And there's a couple of examples. We've provided some out-of-the-box widgets for Salesforce that will work with any custom object in the environment and allow us to hook this up to our AI portfolio. And also examples where we've created widgets that we can drop into things like, say, a Tableau dashboard. Let me show you some of the details on this. So one of the key things here is we approach this a couple of ways, and one is that we've built a custom widget in Salesforce, an example, but we've also built just kind of a standard widget in JavaScript. And what's cool here is that we can drop this in just like we would a Google Map component. And almost any organization knows how to drop in a Google Map at this point. You can drop it into virtually any application. You can make the AI predictions work the exact same way. Key headline on this, of course, is the bit that's most important to the user, which is the AI recommending a particular action that they take? And what does the AI think the probability is on that? The other element then is what actually drives the AI. If we're going to empower our users, we better tell them why it is the AI actually picked out this particular thing. But here's the key thing. If we're really striving for digital transformation and empowering our users, the empowerment better just not be to know what to do or what the action is, but also to be able to participate on the side of, is this actually a useful AI, and is it working for me? A couple of things that we get out of the portfolio approach of AI is that we get an ability for the user to choose in real time how aggressive or how conservative the model actually is. So I might go in as a salesperson and say, hey, I'm light this week, I don't have a lot of meetings, I want to start progressing more or prospecting more aggressively. Let me crank up the aggressiveness and get another batch of things out of the AI that I should be pursuing. Now, this may work fine with the current model with threshold adjustments. That could be great, but I might shift far enough away from the sweet spot for that model that I actually want to choose a different, more aggressive model to use in my deployment. So by using serverless, by taking an approach that we have the portfolio, we have the ability to pick that different model in real time. And lastly, there's always the possibility that the user knows something or has recognized something or some piece of information that we haven't previously captured, and we need to give the user an ability to actually say, this model sucks. I see that it picked this thing, I see that it picked things based on the second highest thing, they were a new customer, but I know that in this case, this customer is far more important because of some other issue. And so by giving the users that feedback, that leads into the really the key where we go next, which is empowering that continuous improvement. If we're really going to support digital transformation, we need to create close feedback loops in the organization. And so not only do we want to do things like get the users' feedback, but we also want to get things like, are the users actually following the model's recommendations? Are their actions aligning with what the AI is actually telling them to do? And so by monitoring what the user's actually doing over the life cycle as they come in and they revisit the record, they provide more information, we can look at if they're acting on the things that the AI said do or not do. And again, we can come up with great AI models. If users aren't using them, they're not creating any value. We can also look at what's happening to our data over time. Now, as we're collecting our data, we're doing our scoring, we're seeing what's going on, one of the things that we do is we keep building to an evolving data set. We can see how that data set either is responding, matching to, or even drifting from our initial information, or even see what the AI signal is in that, and if we should go back and actually train a new portfolio of models at this point to go out and create our AIs. And then lastly, some of the things that we want to look at are the results that we're getting from a business standpoint matching up to the what-if modeling we did up front. In other words, hey, I said these are the deals to chase, the AI actually predicted this values for them. Did this actually occur as I was getting into my revenue, as I was getting into my results? Again, I need to be able to create that closed feedback loop so that it's supporting my digital transformation initiatives of continuous improvement. Now, I mentioned earlier I'd talk about this for a moment, but this whole idea of what strategy and actions are and how those are either working together or not. A key tenet of digital transformation is the organization as a whole should be working in concert with the strategy of the business. Is my strategy, as I mentioned earlier, to drive top line? Is it to drive bottom line? Is it to maximize my resources? Is it to actually cut costs? The problem is that when I build this one true AI to model metrics, not business metrics, I may actually be creating an AI that's actually driving towards a strategy that's inconsistent with what we're doing. One of the interesting things that we've been able to find and identify with our approach of taking AI and analyzing them to business metrics is that, and particularly as I showed you early on, where we're actually showing what the strategy was relative to the models we were built or evaluating, is many times people think that they're trying to drive for top line, and actually they're finding that the actions that they're taking, or even when they go and analyze the data through the AI, the actions they're taking are actually to maximize profit or minimize cost. This is a serious issue where if I have the actions the AI is doing do something different than what the overall strategy is driving towards, I basically have a complete mismatch. And this is exactly what we're trying to solve as we move through digital transformation, is to make sure we have alignment of strategy and action. So the idea is that by doing the model assessment up front, stating what our strategy is, what our cost structure is, we actually are moving towards an alignment here. And as I mentioned earlier, the way we do this in a tool is to actually allow the user to assert what that model is or what that business strategy should be, and then analyze whether or not their actual cost profiles, the risk reward, the goals that they have for resource management is actually in alignment with that strategy. Footnote here, and I don't have anything graphic to show you, but we handle fairness in the same way, because if you think about trying to maximize costs or profit or these kinds of things, you're going for optimizing to a business objective. If you think about fairness, you're looking at how you're serving the community, serving different groups, whether you're being fair across groups. If you think about that, that also is an optimization of resources. By putting these two things together, you get a great result, which is you're enforcing fairness based on the resources that you want to spend in your organization. This is totally different than saying somehow I'm going to create an enlightened AI. And so when you think about fairness, don't necessarily think about, hey, I want to bake it into the AI, because here's the terrible things about AI. They can do very nefarious things without your knowledge or insights. They will pick up on things. You may have said, I eliminated all gender references from all of the data in my data set, or all race or economic or whatever. And lo and behold, the AI will pick up on that. But if instead you say, I'm going to create a portfolio of AI models, I'm going to make conscious decisions about how I'm going to allocate resources to achieve fairness in the way I serve my market. Now I can evaluate the models and find models that will act fairly versus trying to synthetically create models that somehow are going to treat that objective. And lastly, and I don't have a lot of time left, but last bit on this is that once I move to an environment where instead of doing this waterfall process, I'm being more agile in terms of creating my AIs, I can now decouple what I'm doing in my different tasks. So before, if I'm waterfall, I really am doing an assembly line, and it requires experts. We know that the way we build models today, it requires experts. And we end up with something that's very bespoke, but based on the metrics that somebody imagined was needed to solve the problem. Whereas if we move to a more agile approach and evaluating a portfolio of models, I'm really into much more of an assembly line. And what I've done is I've created an environment now where I can totally decouple the tasks. I can send business people out, business analysts out to understand what the cost models are for the business that I want to apply, or how I want to change those over time. I can send other people out who are focused on our equity and audit of fairness initiatives to identify what the resourcing should be and how we should be evaluating our markets in that regard. And by decoupling these things, I position the organization to be much more effective in the digital transformation, because I can now move to a very agile approach. And I can actually, and the way we approach this is that we actually create a set of tasks, or we call them microtasks. We track these tasks in the system so that we see what's been done, what's been complete. We create an ability to create auditability in our overall AutoML process. And then lastly, we can assign these things out so that, like, I've assigned myself 2 tasks in this. I'm actually deploying an updated AI portfolio, and I'm responsible for actually identifying some of the fairness drivers. Okay, I've got about 1.5 minutes left. I'm just going to bring up just one final quick point, which is, so I mentioned a teaser at the start. This creates a new way that I can do security, and I can achieve the needs of being data-driven, as well as privacy and PII. And the key thing is that in traditional waterfall approach, I have created a pipeline where I move a lot of data around, okay? And whenever I move data around, I introduce people and process. And whenever I introduce people and process, I have more things that I have to check in terms of compliance. Here's what's cool about taking a serverless approach. Instead of moving the data around, we move the code to the data. Leave the data where it is. Stop looking at the data. Put it someplace, put it in a vault, move the code to the vault, have it do the results, send out the metadata to look at that. And so the way we approach this is that we really run this as a managed service. Rather than us taking possession in our cloud, we actually just send the data direct to the customer's cloud. And what's cool about this is we don't have to move data around to see what the results are. As a matter of fact, here's an example where I might have data residency requirements. I've got data in basically 2 different regions, 2 different geographies. I leave the data there. I send the code to the data to do the analysis. I create the metadata. I send back the results. I can do this with my data exploration or my EDA. I can do this with my model training as well, and basically distribute out the bits, do the training, create a hierarchical model, and voila, I haven't moved any data. So, in conclusion, best way to meet your security and compliance requirements, stop moving data. Put it where it belongs, leave it there, send the code to it, get back the results, and you've eliminated a whole bunch of steps for your organization in terms of trying to come to compliance and support all the needs for PII. We've done this with business with health, in the healthcare, where we've very rapidly supported all the requirements for HIPAA while creating very agile development of AI. We think that financial services absolutely needs to move more to this model, because while the eye is on fairness right now, I predict a future where for financial services, the privacy and security requirements will be just as strict as HIPAA. We're coming there. It will happen to us. This is a very horizontal approach. It'll apply across a lot of industries. It'll even apply to structured as well as unstructured data. We do things like transfer learning in serverless models and different things like this, so we can leverage these other methods. Lastly, I'd like to finish with an offer. I realize I'm out of time or over time, but we have an approach where we like to say, hey, if you want to do a proof of concept, see how a portfolio of AI would actually work, why don't you take 30 days, work with us. We have a very 1, 2, 3 process. We look at the data to say, is it good enough? We figure out what your cost models are so we can figure out business impact. And then we look at how your users could actually use this. At the end of this, you look at it and you say, based on your criteria, does this create an impact for my business or not? Did this help me with my digital transformation or not? If it didn't, you don't pay us. If it does, pay us what we've agreed to. And here's the thing. Over 90% of everybody who's gone through this process with us has paid us. And it's not just because we're nice. So here's some examples of some of the things we've done. If you're really interested in this, I've got an extra cool thing, which is Intel is actually participating with us to actually do some formal benchmarks around the immediate impact project and how it can work in serverless as well as take advantage of Intel architecture. And so if you're interested in a 30-day impact project and you're interested or would be willing to participate in the benchmark, come see us. We've almost got this program filled up, but there's a few slots left. As part of it, Intel actually will pay for the costs of the immediate impact project, and we actually contributed to it as well. So if you're interested in participating, you can actually have your first immediate impact project, no charge. Our goal of these projects is to actually show you how to get the benefit out of a portfolio of AI and stop having AI done to you, have it work for you. So thanks.
You